Good evening and welcome to On TV, a live discussion because we are we have our thumb on all of the very talked about topics in the media and what people are talking about at the water coolers at work. We thought that it would be really interesting to sort of do a parallel between our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and the U.S. President, Donald Trump. So we got some people together. We're just going to have a discussion. I have some topics that I'd like to sort of zero in on. So joining us this evening, we're very lucky to have Sunny Spina right beside me.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much for coming out. I appreciate it. Greg Lefebvre.
Hello, hello.
Lynn Brown is at the end. Lynn, thank you. And Matthew Shoemaker.
Thanks for having me.
So we're I think we're going to, like I said, draw the parallels between the two leaders and the differences, which in my mind are very obvious. Let's start with image first. Sunny, why don't you start with that? How do you feel the image of each of the leaders is? Do you like Trump's image or do you like Trudeau's image better?
Well, you know, image is a really important thing for any civic leader, or any leader of a country, or anyone who wants to lead in any capacity. And we know that the image of each of these individuals has evolved over the past couple of years. And even if you go back even farther, I mean, you got Donald Trump, who evolved as a businessman, and he had that image of a business mogul, and then into a TV personality, and then into a political person, and then into the President of the United States, the most powerful nation in the world. And I mean, that's a huge, huge shift. But during that, he's been very consistent with his personality. So his personality has kind of resonated in each of those settings that he found himself in. And now a direct flip from that is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now he's also held a whole bunch of different positions throughout his life, and again recently in politics, maybe not quite as recent as Donald Trump, and certainly has the history in his family.
Growing up with it,
yeah,
sure.
and certainly has that history as well. He's gone through an evolution as well. What we do know about him is that's been a little more consistent is he has kind of consistently portrayed himself as that empathetic and emotional person who is less closed off, which is I think a pretty good thing for a leader to have. Less of that combative role and more of that empathetic and emotional. It's a good thing for a leader to show emotion at times, I think. So I mean, both of them have really evolved, and I think they're going to continue to evolve over the next coming years.
Matt, as our resident politician, what's your take on image and how important it is, or whether or not it is important? Should you stand on your record?
Well, I think there's standing on your record, and then there's portraying yourself in a certain way. And I think that Donald Trump's portrayal of himself breaks all the political rules, the conventional political rules. So I think the image of Prime Minister Trudeau is probably one that people associate more with a political leader. Donald Trump obviously, is brash. He's at times combative. He is sort of shoots from the hip. Whether it's strategic or not strategic, I think that's a different discussion. But he definitely does not sort of have the image that you conjure up when you think of a politician.
Mm-hmm. With regards to Greg, either leader, do you think that they're in it now? They've established their image. Is there any chance, if they feel the need to, that they could change their image now?
I don't think Prime Minister Trudeau can. I think that's part of where he resonates with a lot of his base. So I don't think necessarily Justin Trudeau can get away from his image. Trump, on the other hand, he is who he is, right? Like he's crazy, he's off the wall. That's what resonates with his base and his supporters. So I think with him, he can kind of act and behave really erratically and however he wants, and I don't think that that's going to necessarily turn his base off, because we've all been witness to that. He's hot and cold at a moment's notice. So he has changed a lot over the course of the last 500 days or 600 days or however long he's been president, and it really hasn't affected him at all, whereas Justin Trudeau has been fairly consistent with his image. Yep.
Now, Lynn, with regards to, there's lots of trade talks, leaders of countries are constantly traveling internationally. How important is it for you to have a leader that you can feel proud of?
Well, speaking from a journalist point of view, I think it's fairly fair to say that Donald Trump has changed the landscape for journalists trying to cover his ever-evolving, fluid stories. I've covered Justin Trudeau, and from my point of view, he's always been very open to questions. He's respectful to the media. He never shuts anyone down, as far as I've ever witnessed. Even when you watch him in like national stories, for example, you can see him. He wants to be respectful, and he listens to the question. He's never, to the best of my knowledge, ever called anyone fake news. And so that is
somebody from a news conference.
Yes, exactly, and
Right.
those are the kinds of things that we're seeing now in the American sphere. Now, Prime Minister Harper was one when I covered him when he was here for the most recent national election, federal election. He also did not take any questions from the media.
Yes, I remember
so
that.
I think there's not necessarily a precedent for the fact that Trump is doing this. That has been the case for other leaders as well. But Justin Trudeau, as a leader, in my mind, has definitely elevated the game for politicians. He has like you were saying before, he has a certain image that he has, but I think he brings an authentic self to what he's doing. Trump is also bringing his authentic self, we'd use words like brash and unconventional,
Aggressive.
and other words as well. But the stories change, and so as a journalist trying to cover him, there's probably no end of rewrites and script changes and going live in a national, and like for CNN, for example, I've heard like somebody like Don Lemon being quoted as saying, we were ready to go, we had everything ready, and then we had to change everything at a moment's notice. And he was being interviewed by Stephen Colbert, who also has gained, I would say, from Trump being president.
He's good fodder for the comedians. It
Isn't
seems
Actually,
like.
there was something I was
right?
reading that said that comedians and journalists have gained exponentially because of Donald Trump being in office. But yeah, it must be. I can imagine as a journalist in America right now, it must be very difficult, and not knowing from one day to the next if the story is actually accurate, having to drill down on that, how many contacts you have to have,
Who's still
how
working
many
there?
how many times you have to verify the fact is actually a fact, and. Yeah, so there's a lot of things I think that the American journalists are experiencing right now that are somewhat harmful to their own personal well-being. That's some of the things I've been hearing from.
I think when we talk about Justin Trudeau, though, when we talk about him being very, very authentic, I think at times he is, and at other times he's not. He's very difficult to follow as well at times, because when you do see him talk about things like First Nations issues, Aboriginal issues, he does appear sincerely empathetic and really comes across as someone who really understands what those issues are and really wants to come forward and resolve them.
Women's issues, too.
Women's issues, yeah, but then when you see him and there's issues such as the ones that come up with the Aga Khan visit, well, he certainly seems far less sincere and more self-serving in those answers, or non-answers at times, because although he is open to the media's questions, he rarely answers a question. He's open to taking it, but in true political fashion, often there's rarely an actual answer there. But when I think back to the conflict of interest investigation,
Right.
that sincerity was lost. That that when we looked at him there, we didn't see that prime minister who we thought in those similar scenarios where we had First Nations issues and whatnot, where we believe what he's saying. It looked far less believable, much more self-serving. So we do have that difficulty here as well, I think, in Canada with our own politicians, but certainly on a lesser degree.
And I'm wondering, like with something like the conflict of interest story, that he may be advised to deflect and to not try and drill down on the answer too much, because that's the advice that he's been given by legal counsel and the people that are around him.
Yeah, but as a leader of our country, sometimes you just got to stand up and take ownership of some of those. I mean,
Yes,
especially to be the
I
first
agree,
prime
yeah.
minister in history to be convicted of that, right? It's
Sure.
or sorry, I shouldn't say convicted, but to be found guilty of that.
Greg, you talked about when you first started about with regards to President Trump's image, that he's been consistently, whichever adjective you would like to use. Do you think that that's hindered his work at all? Do you think there's a group of people who, just because of his presentation, don't take him seriously?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. There's obviously a lot of people that are going to be turned off by that type of behavior. He's an absolute wild card, but I think that's probably one of his political strengths is there's no book on the guy, right? So I remember reading a quote at some point in time, and I'm not sure what country it came from, but it said it's hard to go to war against the United States because they're so erratic. And this was before Trump. This quote's probably 10, 15, 20, 30 years old maybe. But it's hard to go to war against the United States because they don't follow any of the rules and they don't follow the playbook, right? And that's Donald Trump in a nutshell. There is no playbook to this guy. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday about how the media really seems to be losing this battle with him because his approval rating is actually continuously going up. Like,
and his base is going nowhere.
Yeah,
it
no,
is strong.
His base is never going to go anywhere, right? It's just a matter of how many people he can get in with him. And
Sorry, there was actually a poll yesterday released that stated that the base he had after the Helsinki episode, that some of his base were starting to move the other direction, and then with the farmers, most recently with the subsidies, now he's going to bail them out to $12 billion based on the agreement, based on the tariffs that he's been imposing. So those are his base. The farmers are maybe not all of them, but I don't want to paint them all the same way, but that is a large piece of it. And they have the poll that was released yesterday showed that there was a huge shift away from Trump.
Overall, his approval rating since the election has been, it's crazy the way that it's climbing up. I think the last report that came out was 42 or 44%, which I believe after the election was somewhere in the 28, 29, maybe low 30 range. So he's steadily climbing. Despite whatever you want to call what's going on in the media right now, he continues to gain popularity in the United States. By contrast, you can't say that about Justin Trudeau. His approval rating is actually down from when he was elected. So even though you have a guy in Prime Minister Trudeau who is viewed as a very likable, approachable, all that kind of stuff, his approval rating is coming down. Then you have this wild card like Trump, who nobody seems to be able to figure this guy out. His approval rating is climbing. So where I'm getting with this is the media really, I think the media in the States is doing a complete disservice to the people who are against Donald Trump right now, because what they've been doing over the last 500-600 days obviously isn't working, because there is an assault on him right now. Like, I know that he's crazy and he deserves a lot of it, but it is over the top. Like, he picks his nose, he eats the wrong food, they're on him, right? And that's obviously not working.
But Trudeau's the same, right? Trudeau, from how many years ago with the potential assault, there's always those image issues, right? And everybody thought, oh my gosh, not our Justin. But, those are things that come up and you have to deal with. The media has to report on that sort of thing.
Yep.
Right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a difference between reporting on something like sexual assault versus and even the consistency, I guess, is the part that confuses me. You look at how he tackled North Korea and how he tackled Russia, and for the most part, the Democrats were like, oh, he's too soft, he's playing nice with dictators, this, that, and the other thing. But just recently, you look at what he's done with Iran, where it was much more of a hard line, don't mess with us or you'll be sorry, and they still criticize him for it. So it's like, with Russia and North Korea, they criticize him for being way too soft, and then he takes a hardline stance with Iran, and now all of a sudden he's warmongering or trying to start World War III. So there's no consistency with what they're doing and how they're going at him.
He's not consistent.
Very, very possible. Very, very possible. But if I'm on the other side of the house right now, and I'm trying to get this guy out of office, I'm sitting down in a room with a bunch of people saying, what we're doing isn't working. We got to go at this guy a completely different way, because you look at those approval numbers, and the scary thing about it, you could look at that and say, yeah, 42%, 44%, whatever the case is. at 28%, the guy won an election. So obviously there's some kind of flaw in that system.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely.
Election interference in an election.
Yeah.
That's the flaw.
With respect to the inconsistent message coming from the Democrats, in essence, in the U.S., or no message. Yeah, I would say that a big fault of and it happens everywhere. It happened in Ontario several times over. It happened in it's happening in the U.S. right now. You cannot simply be the person who is opposite the current leader. So you can't be the "I'm not Donald Trump."
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have a message. You have to. Donald Trump had a message: "Make America Great Again." Hillary Clinton's message was probably less coherent, less simply boiled down. Maybe it was a better message overall. I would argue it probably was if you were listening. But
She was harder to listen to.
harder
though.
to listen
Why
to
is that?
because the message was not clear, concise. Everyone knew what "Make America Great Again" meant. Not everybody knew what Hillary Clinton was pitching at any given time, because she spoke in, she didn't speak in simplistic terms. She spoke in sort of academic terms, I would say, probably more than slogans. So, we just had an election in Ontario where someone who spoke in slogans did very well. Became the premier, in fact. But in the two elections before that, I mean, in the three elections before that, everyone forgets the Liberals have been unpopular provincially since 2007. It
Right.
looked like they were going to lose to John Tory because he was the not Liberal option. He lost. It looked like they were going to lose to Tim Hudak twice because he was the not Liberal option. He lost both times. So you can't simply be the non-incumbent. You have to go with a message that says, "Here's what I will do."
So do you think people are reacting to image too personally? Like, are they just thinking, okay, you know what? I don't like Trump because he's rude. And so the people on the other side may not have the platform that you're talking about, and so they're just jumping in and saying he's rude. Well, yeah, he is rude, but what's your argument, right? And that's hard for me to say, because I tend to believe a lot in presentation and image and professionalism and that sort of thing. So that's a difficult thing for me to say. But as you said, you need to have a counterpoint with some substance behind it, because somewhere along the way, somebody trusted Trump over Clinton.
Let me jump in on this. I know you wanted to say something. I was I like a lot of people was enthralled with the U.S. election. I felt like I was up till 5 o'clock in the morning on that election day until they finally called it. I watched a lot of the exit interviews from a lot of the different states, and one of the most intriguing ones was Michigan, because Trump ended up actually winning Michigan. And 2 points on that. Number one, Hillary Clinton never even visited there because it had been a Democratic state for so long. It was just so.
It was a given for
Yeah,
her,
so
perhaps.
strategic. Say what you want about Russian collusion and all that kind of stuff. That was a strategic flaw and a huge miscalculation on the Democrats' part to not visit there. But the overwhelming message from these swing states and from these states that Trump surprised everybody was the economic plan. These guys that are living paycheck to paycheck, can't afford to pay their bills, will do anything to find a job. And being nice and respectful and treating everyone with respect, that's one thing, but at the end of the day, it doesn't pay the bills. And a lot of these people, I was listening to these interviews, and they were desperate. You could tell that they didn't want to vote for Trump, but they didn't have a choice because he was the only one promising them the economic success that they've seen since he's been elected. So, image and that kind of stuff, it is important and it does matter, but it doesn't get people working. It doesn't necessarily get them working. It doesn't get them cashing paychecks and paying bills. So at the end of the day,
they sort of stop listening, I think, after a while, especially if a party has been saying the same thing for a long time, and in their mind, the farmer in Iowa knows that's not working. So then somebody who's blustery, who's got a plan, whether it's dramatic or not, comes out and it sort of gives them a little,
Yeah, and you don't have a choice, and it's unfortunate that that's the political scope these days. And I mean, even
really is.
Matthew talked about our election here and the candidates that we had to choose from. That was embarrassing. It really was. You know, my political compass leans libertarian, so I'm kind of center right. So you know, I can appreciate some of the things Trudeau does, no different than I can appreciate some of the things Trump does. But when you look at the grand scheme of things, man, like the choices are just so bad. And I mean, we laughed at the American election. We laughed at Trump, and then that's what we had to deal with in Ontario. You know, and yeah, really.
I was over in Sioux, Michigan the day of the election, and I went and I got permission to go across, and I stood outside of the municipal office in Sioux, Michigan, and I got some exit polls myself, and have some people on camera talking about it, and I was very surprised at the number of people that were stating that they actually stated to me directly that they voted for Trump as they were leaving the office, and that did surprise me.
It did surprise
I
you?
was it actually did surprise me. I was pretty shocked at that.
I'll give you the last word on image, Sunny.
Yeah, and, you know, and I was, on the flip side of that, I wasn't surprised at the number of people that voted for Trump.
Really?
And partly because of what Greg was talking about. People really truly wanted someone to believe in, someone they could rally behind. And if you looked at Donald Trump, the way he presented himself, people did rally behind him in that election, that whole process. They all kind of jumped in. And I think Matthew talked about some of his slogans, Make America Great. I think Drain the Swamp was the other one. You know, 3 syllables, and people would just chant it over and over
and
again,
lock her up.
repeatedly.
Lock her up.
Lock her up was
Lock
another
her
one,
up was
right?
the other one,
And it was
yeah.
just people would chant it
Just 2
over and
days
over
ago.
again.
Yeah.
A high-level
He brings it back up
Trump
again.
person
Yeah.
was at a rally
He regurgitated.
with young people at a university, and they started
Yeah,
Lock her
so
up.
really easy for these people to
Yes.
to
Yeah.
jump into and jump on board with. And I think that's part of the thing that won him the election. And when you talk about not just being the opposite, he kind of came out and said, well, I'm not the opposite. I'm the opposite of everyone you've ever seen. I'm not any party. I'm not a politician. And I'm different than anything you've ever
You know what I want to know, though? Where are the people that didn't think, okay, you know what, that's a really cool, positive, upbeat, aggressive attitude. That's awesome. You know, we want to make America great again. We do. What's your plan? Like, why would I trust your plan? You're a TV reality host
And now we're learning that there are people now losing their jobs because of
and
the
have
trade tariffs.
consistently.
There's a factory, I was reading about this, they make nails. They make nails with steel or
Yes.
aluminum, I'm not sure the medium. And that whole place is gone now, and it's in Texas somewhere. So that they've had to close, and there's 250 people have lost their jobs. So his lack of a plan, slogans don't move an agenda forward. So all of these great slogans, they're not, I mean, however you view them, that does not lead to leadership. It does not create a place where people can feel welcome and build a life and move forward and have dreams. And the American dream right now it's in Trump's hands, and he's playing with it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Some interesting stuff. We're going to talk about the media coming up next. So put that little seed in your head, you guys. And we'll talk about how awesome we are as soon as we come back from this break. Stay with us.
Hi there. I'm from Ad Standards, and I'd like a moment of your time. In 1963, we created the Canadian Code of Advertising Standards. The code not only applies to TV, print, and radio advertising, but all outdoor and online advertising too. Online advertising, what is that? Simply put, we help ensure all advertising across all media is truthful, fair, and accurate. Truth in advertising for over 60 years.
They served to protect our homes. Now many are homeless. They fought for our way of life. Now many are fighting personal battles of their own. They answered the call for our country. Now we honor them by serving our communities. Help us help Canada's veterans. Become a Legion member today.
Pa should have been here by now. He's 3 hours late already.
Pa ain't gonna make it! One of them slave catchers got him. Something must have happened. I just know
Liza,
it.
you both made it past the border yesterday. We've all done this before.
He's our pa. He'll be here.
Come, let's pray.
No more praying.
Liza! Liza!
Between 1840 and 1860, more than 30,000 American slaves came secretly to Canada and freedom. They called it the Underground Railroad.
Lisa! Pa!
We're free. Yes, Pa, we're in Canada.
And welcome back to a live discussion we're having, referring to it as TNT or Trump versus Trudeau. Have some folks in the studio with us to talk about their perspectives and the different things that all of us seem to be talking about and have been talking about since Mr. Trump was elected and Mr. Trudeau was elected as well. Sunny Spina, Greg Lefebvre, Lynn Brown, and Matthew Shoemaker. Thank you all so much for coming in. Appreciate it. Want to talk about the media. It's kind of close to my heart, obviously. Lynn, you as well. Now, instinctively, everybody thinks that the media can make or break a politician. Is that true?
Well, the media's role is to report the facts. So my opinion is that if you don't have the facts to back up what you're stating, that you can't actually state it unless you can drill down and get some verification about what you're stating. So when statements are made like Trump is doing this or Trump is doing that, that's not something that any accredited journalist would ever state. They would have to verify that first. So covering Trump as part of, from a media lens, is somewhat difficult. I would imagine. I don't have to cover him myself personally, but for the American journalists. One of the things that I was listening to on NPR, National Public Radio, and I was on a road trip recently, and there was a great exchange between a journalist and the NPR radio host, and she was asking the journalist, what exactly, how do you cover Trump? Like, how do you do this in this new and evolving media landscape that Trump is paving? One of the things that they decided to do specifically that I recall from the conversation is because he's called like the Twitter president. Yes. So things like, announcing national policy on Twitter rather than going through the proper channels when his own people aren't even aware of it, that's happening more and more often. It happened just a few days ago when Dan Coates, who's the U.S. intelligence director of U.S. intelligence, of which there's 17 agencies, learned via, like on a live, on their live broadcast with, I think it was NBC. They were in a big auditorium full of young people, and they were listening to listening to him and his experiences. Learned that the journalist pulled out her phone and she saw a tweet that had just come through from Trump announcing, with the U.S. intelligence director sitting right beside her on the stage, that Putin is coming to Washington. And his face just dropped. Like, he was not aware of that. He was not part of that. So the media is breaking a story live as it's happening, rather than through a channel that might be more prudent in a situation like that. I would imagine.
That's him trying to have the upper hand always? Do you think that's him trying to, because from my perspective, watching in the last 500 days or so, it seems like because he's the Twitter president, he's made comments and announcements on Twitter, and then the media goes to his people, and they don't have a clue what he's talking about, because he's made that decision just like that.
And so one of the things that this gal that I was listening to on the radio, she stated that one of the things that they decided to do was to not, they have to use the Twitter, they have to use the tweet, and I've noticed that the Canadian journalists, national like CTV and CBC and some of the national ones don't, when they use a tweet for President Trump tweeting in the morning, we just got this through, Trump has tweeted this, Trump has tweeted that, they don't show how many retweets and how many likes it's gotten. So they just state the message, not the actual other piece of it.
And the game of it, right?
That's right. And the reason behind it being that it could inflate or exacerbate the problem or the issue that the Trump is trying to put forward. So that's something that they decided to pull back from. So they used the tweet message, but not the how many likes.
Matthew, do you think there's such a thing as fake news?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree that fake news exists, but I think Trump uses it, as a way of labeling anything he disagrees with. So that is obviously not fake news. If I disagree with a story that's reported about City Council, I don't think it's fake news. I might disagree with the content of it, but I don't think it's fake news. There are made-up stories. You see them all the time on Twitter, and oftentimes journalists will clarify them. In your Twitter timeline, this is false or this is false. The facts are wrong. These are the true facts. Daniel Dale, in fact, from the Toronto Star, that's his career is reporting on misstatements and lies that are said, and there's lots of them out there. He compiles them every week, and I think it was 54 just today, so that were stated by President Trump. So do I think there's fake news? I think it exists, but I don't think that the way President Trump portrays fake news is either healthy for democracy, healthy for his own ability to sell his message, because there's a use to getting your message out there by getting the media to report on it. And I think if he labels everybody as fake news, it will eventually one day come back to bite him. So I do think it's out there. I don't think that it is what he portrays it as.
Greg, do you think it's unfair the way the media treats our leaders, Justin Trudeau, Donald Trump?
I mean, I have no problems with them being held to the highest standard. They really should be. That comes with the position. Sometimes I wish our media would treat our guy the way that their media treats their guy.
More aggressively?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the most recent thing with the sexual assault allegation, that's essentially been swept under the rug.
It sure
right?
has.
That was I've had time to reflect. We don't need an investigation. I experience things differently.
I don't recall it.
I don't think it was swept under the rug. I think he was asked about it repeatedly. He had an answer that he had to share that was based on his own experience. And the woman that was involved in it didn't want it to go anywhere. The fact that it was out there was not her doing. So there was not really much more that could be done with it, because the victim of the person that was involved in it did not want it to go any further.
I had heard that. She put the kibosh.
To state it. She said, I refused to talk about it. So if that's the case, then what else is supposed to happen with it? There's nothing else that can happen.
No, that is part of the problem, though, because
there's no media person that can drill down on that, because there's nothing to drill down on.
No, I mean, Justin Trudeau has been very, very specific with how we should handle those types of cases and what should happen when these things happen. Specifically, we need to believe them and all that kind of stuff. So where my issue was that, and to your point, where she didn't want it to go anywhere, that to me is not consistent with the expectation that's been developed and that kind of stuff. And that is part of the problem with sexual assaults and harassment with women, is a lot of times they don't. That's the attitude that they want to take, is they don't want to get involved. They're too scared, and
they don't want to be re-victimized.
Right. So that's part of the problem in getting some of these cases to push forward and punishing people who have done these sort of things. So I do 100% believe that this was swept under the rug. I mean, like I said, it was a week or 2 weeks, and going back to his statement, it was, well, I experienced it differently than she did. Like, I heard that and I'm like, what kind of answer is this? Like, how is this in any way, shape, or form acceptable or consistent?
He stated that, so
Yeah.
I can't
Oh
agree with
yes,
that.
100%. So that's no way consistent with anything that we've seen, and because there's been a lot of it over the last. I mean, can you imagine if Bill Cosby had have said that line when all of that stuff was going on? I mean, it still is going on with him, and to me, that was just an unacceptable answer, and definitely inconsistent.
Trudeau did reach out the very next day, apparently, and he apologized to her because there was some exchange that had happened, and he did address it at the time.
But then he denied it happening and said he had no recollection of it ever happening
Well,
until
that's
he was.
different, though.
Yeah.
He didn't. He said he didn't recall. He didn't deny it.
Well, he said he had no
As to
recollection of it
his memory,
happening.
right?
And then later on, flipped over to what Greg was saying about how, obviously she experienced that differently than I did. And in my opinion, I didn't do anything inappropriate. Well, it was reported on 20 years ago. There's a story on, or 18 years ago, I think. There's a story on it, and so yeah, I have to agree with Greg
How is
on
that different from like the several affairs, the several scandals that are following Donald Trump around? I mean, you know what? Like, seriously, there's some women there.
There's a lot of
And
stuff.
there's a lot of women there.
So
and I wonder often how it is that they just keep coming up and they sort of get dealt with, but sort of don't get dealt with. He doesn't react and thank you very much, doesn't say anything.
Yeah, so, and if we go back just a second, if Donald Trump is the president of Twitter, then Justin Trudeau is certainly the prime minister of Instagram. Because, I mean, we take a look anywhere, I haven't seen a shirtless Donald Trump on Instagram, but I certainly have seen a shirtless...
There's a reason for that.
Certainly have seen that. And when we go back to, does the media have an effect? And that was your original question. Does the media have the effect to make or break these folks? Well, there was a poll out in one of, and I forget which publication it was, there was a poll out, something about what do you like best about Canada, and it listed a couple of things. And leading the poll was Justin Trudeau's socks.
Right.
And that's, quite frankly, irresponsible as a journalist to put that, what do you like best about Canada, Justin Trudeau's socks? Well, that's not a fair assessment
You know what,
of anything.
though? If that's the reality, you have to say that as a journalist.
Yeah, it was just a poll. It wasn't a
Do you know what I mean, though?
research-
As the results are,
And it
what's
also
your
depends
favorite?
on the questions that are asked
Yeah.
in the poll, how they're framed in the
What
poll.
options are
What's
given.
the intent of
So
the
when we
poll?
get back to can the media make or break a person,
Yeah.
well, yeah, if you can,
Yeah.
right? They certainly have the ability to do that. But does Donald Trump do any favors to them? Not really, right?
No, he's banning them from the White House.
Does Justin Trudeau play a lot better in the media? He can, absolutely. But I mean, we do have scandal after scandal with Justin Trudeau as well. I mean, we have the conflict of interest investigation. We have the millions of dollars in payments to Lord Later. We have the latest allegations, all of those things. So certainly there are the same number of allegations, or not the same number, but the same kind of allegations following him around that are following around Donald Trump. The difference, I think, is Donald Trump, I think, labels them like we talked about as well, that's fake news and dismisses it and walks away from it and just kind of lets it go.
But the evidence is there. And,
Absolutely.
And the more he says fake news, the more someone in my position thinks, you're shutting us up.
Absolutely.
And you
Yeah.
know what? That's a scary thing.
It is, and it shouldn't, no leader should be doing that.
Absolutely not.
If there's something that's coming forward, the last thing I want to hear from a leader is, that's nonsense, that's fake news, and dismissing it.
Dismissive.
That's
Exactly.
the last thing I want to hear from a leader. And second to last thing I want to hear is an answer that in no way actually answers the question. So unfortunately, we have two leaders right now that are doing that. Donald Trump is dismissing everyone, and Justin Trudeau at times is providing answers that aren't even close to what the questions, to answering the questions that were asked, when they're the difficult questions. So as journalists, I believe it's the responsibility of them to continue pressing on these issues. And I think that's what Greg was talking about, is this constant press on Donald Trump to answer some of these questions.
But then he doesn't answer them.
Unfortunately, they're not getting answers. Right.
And he's shutting everybody down, and now he's banning people from it. So does that not indicate that he's either bullying the media, or he doesn't want to say something that he'll regret later?
Yeah, I don't know if he's worried about saying something.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's too late for that.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if he's too worried about
Yeah,
that.
that's a good point.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's more so number one. I mean, Donald Trump's business history is very well documented,
Yes.
and there's a trail of dead bodies behind all of his success. So it's more of the there really is. I mean,
There is.
he is.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. So it's more him shutting the media out. That's Donald Trump. That's how he became Donald Trump.
But is that okay?
I mean, he got voted in. Like, here's the thing with Trump. He ran on a platform, like Matt said, make America great again, build the wall, America first, all that. Like, you had everything on, and you had all of his history. You knew what he was like business-wise. Like I said, the trail of dead bodies that I referenced, everybody knew about. Like, you knew those stories. And you had an election, and the people said, this is the guy that we want. So at the end of the day, right, wrong, or indifferent, is it Trump's fault? Is it his base fault? Or is it the 180 million people that didn't bother to show up and vote in the election? Is it their fault? Or is it a combination of all those things?
Or is it the fault of the Electoral College? Because he did in fact lose the popular vote, and that's, I wouldn't suggest that the election is illegitimate in any way because of that, because others have won the Electoral College and lost the popular vote, or won the popular vote, and so I don't think that it's necessarily that it illegitimizes his election, but I do think it raises the question, well, is this really what the people wanted, or is this what strategically they got because certain cohorts or certain groups of people in certain states voted by very slim margins to elect Donald Trump.
Strategically is the right answer to that, because I actually listened to Kellyanne Conway speak about that, and she was like, listen, this was our strategy. This was our strategy the whole time, because these were the rules to win the election. If the rules had been different, and it would have been, we didn't go to California. Like Kellyanne Conway said right out, we did not bother in California because of the rules and the way that it works. We knew we didn't have a chance. Had the rules been different and it was a 1-for-1, we would have gone to California and we would have had a different strategy. So the rules were there. Everybody knew what the rules were, and they built a strategy based on winning based on those rules. So
and it's possibly that the rules, it's possible that the rules were actually broken, if it's proven that the Russians were in fact interfering in an election. So maybe stating something that's it's an illegitimate election is too harsh, but there is the potential that this election was compromised.
Okay. One more question on media right after this break, and then we're going to talk about other things like tariffs and economy and who's doing a better job at those kinds of things. So stay with us. It's a live discussion. TNT on TV right after this.
It's the clearance sale we have to have. The furniture sale you don't want to miss. The giant summer sale in clearance at Mio's Furniture Fashions. Our showroom is full, extremely full. Now we must clear our floors. So Mio's pushes discounts to the absolute limit. Not because we want to, but because we have to. You'll find living room, dining room, bedroom furniture, and mattresses all slashed in price. Plus financing is available during the giant summer sale in clearance at Mio's Furniture Fashions. Service before and after the sale. 261 Trunk Road. Where else?
Trump or Trudeau, a live conversation on TV this evening. Joining me, Sunny Spina, Greg Lefebvre, Lynn Brown, and Matthew Shoemaker. Thank you all so much. This has been so interesting. One quick question, still relating to the media. I know I'm harping a little bit. What do you think the reaction would have been had there been an audio tape with an entertainment reporter with Justin Trudeau saying what he said about women coming off the bus with that reporter? What do you think would have happened? Would something different have happened?
I think so. And it goes a bit back to the question you asked earlier, which is, can the media make or break a politician? I would say because Justin Trudeau is, as we were again talking about earlier, a bit more of a traditional, a portrayal of a politician, he's expected to play by the rules that traditionally have been in place. So a scandal like that, and it was a scandal, it was frankly offensive and should have cost him the election, in my opinion. It is something serious and probably would have done in any other politician or anybody else who was not like Trump. And Trump was able to sort of scoff it off, laugh it off. At the time, he did say it was locker room banter.
So here's how that happened. That was the only time I've ever heard Trump apologize. He actually came out and said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to," like, it was probably one of, like, it was like a Justin Trudeau-esque speech where he came out. I don't know if he necessarily apologized, said I'm sorry, but it was you could tell it was, okay, listen, I messed up. I'm going to be a better person. We're going to move past this. And that's really the only time I can ever remember him ever about anything. So I think that that strategic, whether it was strategic or not, and you never really know on his end whether it was sincere or not, but that's how he got past that. And it was, like I said, it was really the only time I ever heard him.
That was explosive.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Wow. Let's talk tariffs now.
Yeah.
Sonny, what about the tariffs and the potential destruction of the relationship on tariffs between Canada and the United States with what's happening right now?
There's so much happening with this topic right now. There's so much going on. I mean, Canada and the U.S. is Canada's largest trade partner. Yes. We just are, by virtue of our position in the world and what we're trading. I mean, we need them, they need us. It's a relationship. Now, if we go back, and this is my opinion, where I think this started is with the dairy farmers. When you look back to the tariffs that are imposed on dairy products like milk coming across from the U.S. into Canada, and that's nearly a 300% tariff. Mm-hmm. So there's no country that can simply ban legal things from coming across the border, but what you do, or what you can do, is put these tremendous tariffs on it, and you hear Trump talk about the unfair practices that Canada is doing and hurting the dairy farmers, and that's, in my opinion, a reference to this 300% tariff coming back into Canada. I think that's where all this kind of started. I agree. And so potentially if you look at it that way, potentially his tariff on steel and aluminum coming into the States from Canada is maybe in retaliation to something like that.
So then what if we retaliate? He retaliates and we retaliate. You know what I mean?
This is what we've done now. We've retaliated. I think we have a 25% tariff on steel and a 10% tariff on aluminum.
And pickles.
And strategically we've put tariffs on things like frozen pizzas, bourbon, and chocolate, because those are made in the three big states, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and I think Wisconsin. Yeah. Three big states where Trump had huge supporters. So we've now placed, as Canada, we've placed these tremendous tariffs on those products.
Was that the right reaction?
I have to say, I think so. I think there's something you have to do there.
Yeah.
But I think that when instead of looking at this myopically and looking at, okay, tariffs are the problem, I think the bigger problem is NAFTA. I think that's the bigger problem. Trump wants a NAFTA agreement. Everybody wants a NAFTA agreement. It's been far too long that our government has allowed NAFTA to go on without negotiations. And when they did come to the table, they had too many things on the table that weren't, in my opinion, what the priorities of NAFTA should have been. Should have been things like jobs and stuff like that. And they had too many things about other stuff about the environment and things. Now, those are important topics that need to be in there, but only after you negotiate the important things in the beginning. So I think this whole thing on tariffs, actually, in my opinion, goes back to NAFTA. And it goes back to that agreement that hasn't been in place. Now, if we look at our government now, we have...
But he's not budging on NAFTA either,
He's not budging on that right now either because of his own position. But we have a government now where we have members of parliament who have been requesting emergency meetings to come forward, come and sit in Parliament right now, let's get this hammered out, and our government says no. Well, this is not the time for partisan politics. This is the time for everyone to sit down
and
get
talk.
this job done, because we need it. It needs to be done. We're losing many jobs, thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs are affected by this on both sides of the border.
And people are reacting now.
Yeah, so we need to, the partisan politics in regards to this need to end. When those requests were made for the government to come back and sit down, there needs to be that agreement. Everyone needs to get there, sit down, get this job done, because it's that important to both our countries.
Do you think the tariffs and the reaction to Donald Trump's, especially with steel and aluminum, because of course that affects us directly, do you think the reaction from Canada was the right one? Should it have been stronger?
So, well, here's the reason that I struggle with this question is, like I said, my political compass leans libertarian, which tariffs are not a part of that at all. So it's very much free market capitalism, let the market control itself. So I don't agree with the tariffs on either side.
There's nobody with power,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
There's nobody in charge.
Yeah, well, the people
has the upper
the
hand.
people are in charge, and that's why I love libertarianism, is because it's the people, not the government, right? That's why I really gravitate towards that that spectrum. So. They're wrong on both sides, right? And Trump has come out and said, and again, you have to take it for what it's worth coming from Trump, because you never know what he's going to say and do from breakfast to lunch. But seriously, so what he said is, let's get rid of all of the tariffs. You get rid of yours, we'll get rid of ours, and we'll call it a good one. So that part of his dialogue I really like and I appreciate. I don't know what the holdup is or why we're hesitant.
Is it possible, do you think? Is it feasible?
I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be. Like I said, I'm very much a supporter of the free market, and let the free market decide. I let the people decide, right?
Matt, with the history of tariffs, though, is that something that can happen?
Yeah, I would say it's a great long-term goal, but it's certainly not achievable
tomorrow
to get a deal. So I think you would struggle to find any party in Canada, Conservative, New Democrat, or Liberal, that would agree to no tariffs, wholesale elimination of all tariffs to get a NAFTA deal. I think there can be provisions in there that transition out of certain tariffs. If we talk about the dairy tariff specifically, I mean, to ensure that there is not the financial collapse of our farming industry, we have to make sure that the systems are in place. Donald Trump himself is putting, buckets of money in place to help soy farmers in the U.S. So, we have to make sure that our farmers here, if we are going to look at doing something like eliminating the dairy tariffs, aren't going to be in financial hardship. So it might be a good long-term goal. It's not going to get us an NAFTA deal. It's not going to get these steel and aluminum tariffs eliminated from their side. So I don't disagree with Greg, but I see that there's definitely some.
It's complex.
It's complex.
I agree with what he's saying. Like he's bang on there. Yeah.
Excuse me. There's also the issue of food security. So in amongst all of these issues with food and dairy and crops, wheat, oats, barley, there's a system that could be compromised in just open borders with food. There's food security. There's a global food system, of which Canada is a recognized important player, especially in shipping food overseas to the World Food Program and Canadian Food Grains Bank and things like that. So I think it's important that we do have some checks and balances.
And certainly eliminate the tariffs.
And the dairy quota. I mean, the farmers that have their dairy quota, that's their livelihood. That the family farm is everything to those families.
And has been for generations,
and to take
right?
away those barriers creates uncertainty for them, possible poverty. They could potentially lose everything that they've invested in generations of a family that's farmed. I don't know any dairy farmers specifically that are getting really rich doing this. They're living their life and they work very hard doing it. And if they're saying this is what we need to protect our livelihood, then I think they're the experts in that, and so I would look to them. And as far as partisan politics going with NAFTA, my understanding is that the NAFTA team is comprised of all the parties. There are people, Rona Ambrose is part of that. And she's part of the Progressive Conservative, or the Conservatives. So I don't know that it is a partisan team that's representing Canada at the NAFTA table. And some things I think have to be left to the high-level players, because that's actually, Trump is very much about, he doesn't want to talk to a whole bunch of people. That's not his style. He wants the fewer the better. So I believe that Canada is rolling with that. They're trying to figure out how to negotiate with the NAFTA team that's in place in the United States. And they're doing what they have to do to fall in and just keep falling in. And I keep Krista Freeland in my prayers, frankly, to
Yes.
make sure that
Boy.
she survives all of this.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, just before we wrap the program up, we're going to talk about money. Stay with us. It's a live discussion on TV. Trump or Trudeau?
It's the clearance sale we have to have. The furniture sale you don't want to miss. The giant summer sale in clearance at Neo's Furniture Fashions. Our showroom is full, extremely full. Now we must clear our floors. So Neo's pushes discounts to the absolute limit. Not because we want to, but because we have to. You'll find living room, dining room, bedroom furniture, and mattresses all slashed in price. Plus, financing is available during the giant summer sale in clearance at Neo's Furniture Fashions. Service before and after the sale. 261 Trunk Road. Where else?
Hi, I'm Catherine G. McRae, and my show is Perspective. You can catch my show on Mondays at 9 p.m. on TV, or you can also watch it on View on Demand through Sue Online. Thank you, and in the meantime, what's your perspective?
And welcome back to TNT, Trump or Trudeau on TV, a live discussion we're having this evening. Joining me, Sunny Spina, Greg Lefebvre, Lynn Brown, and Matthew Shoemaker. And we're running out of time. We only had an hour. Boy, we could talk for days and days about this. The economy, whose economy's better? Canadian or American? We only have 4 minutes, guys, so hurry up.
I think the perception right now, and you could probably argue it. Actually, you know what? It's not even. I think statistically, the American economy is much stronger right now. I think where the argument really comes down to is who do you credit for the American economy success? Because I think there's some people that would like to credit Obama, and I think there's people that would like to credit Trump, specifically Trump, I guess, would like to credit himself for that. So I think statistically, I think the American economy is doing much better than our economy. I think that there's probably an argument as to who's actually responsible for it.
That's interesting because I think a lot of people feel a little bit insecure with his leadership. So it's interesting that the economy is doing so well. Are they just blindly trusting him, Sonny?
Blindly trusting
Trump.
Yeah, I don't know, really. That's hard to say on what's going on there. But if you flip it back to Canada and what's going on with our economy, well, it's scary. It's a really scary climate right now. We know that households in Canada right now have a I think it's 1.67 to 1 ratio. That means they have $1.67 of debt to every dollar of income. That's a really scary position for us to be in right now. And when we have a government that is borrowing trillions of dollars by the bucket load and spending it all over the place, I mean, that puts our government at risk now. That puts our entire nation. Look what happened in Ontario over the last, whatever it is, 14 years or so. We now have the largest subnational debt in the world in Ontario. We're on the same path to do that across Canada right now. So we have leaders that are doing some very dangerous things to our economy. Now, they may flip that around and say that they believe that they're investing in Canada. We don't borrow money like that to invest. You invest money you got. And unfortunately, that's not what we're doing right now in Canada. So I think Greg's quite right when he says the American economy is a little better. I think their ratio is 1.7, so $1.07 to every dollar right now. So they are about, it's a 60-cent difference there, right?
Matthew, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I guess we're having a couple discussions here: deficits, debt, and the economy. I think, given the tariffs and the uncertainty with NAFTA, I would say the Canadian economy is probably doing about as well as you'd expect it. Would I like it to be doing better? Yes, of course I would like it to be doing better. But I'm not sure you'll get that until there's a settled NAFTA deal, locally certainly, until the steel plant comes out of CCAA and we have a decision on Nora. We probably won't see some of the economic anxiety lifted. But if we're talking deficits, yes, our federal government does have several $billion-dollar deficit. Our provincial government for the last number of years has had billions of dollars in deficit. But the U.S. deficit, it was just announced the other day, is going to hit a record $1 trillion or something like that this year. And that's not because of investment. That's because of tax cuts. Totally different way of achieving a deficit. That is a structural deficit. What we've got when you're borrowing to make an investment in a certain industry or make an investment in a certain infrastructure or whatever it is you want to do, buy a pipeline so that you can earn an economic return, is different than simply cutting taxes, creating a structural deficit, and making it harder in the future, because you're not creating economic activity. I would suggest, and therefore you're not going to ever climb out of the hole that you're digging.
Thank you so much, guys. We're out of time, unfortunately. Awfully good of you to join me for this. I really, really appreciate the conversation. Hopefully you'll come back and we'll talk about other things as well. Joining me tonight, Matthew Shoemaker, Lynn Brown, Greg Lefebvre, Sunny Spina, Trump or Trudeau, you decide. A live discussion on TV. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. Much more ahead.